sticks, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the
Welcome to the
government,
Politics Guys. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University. And I'm joined specially again by Michael Levy, a political scientist, in this Supporters Exclusive episode. Michael, welcome to the Supporters Exclusive show.
Hey, nice to see you, Trey. Got my name wrong again, but that's okay.
You know, listen, this is the Supporters show, so we can be honest about this. We did more than a few takes on the first one, and you very rightfully said, look, if you get it wrong again, we're just going to move forward. So I think that's fair.
Yep.
I'm going to have to practice this better because apparently I am a terrible human being. But listen, people who listen to the show,
maybe
they
you're
know
watching
that.
too much Schitt's Creek and Eugene Levy or something.
Well, you know what? It's not Schitt's Creek. You're actually onto something. My wife and daughter, he does this whole like traveling show on Apple TV. And he goes all over and he looks at this stuff and like looks at different cultures, and they love that. And they have been watching a ton of that. And that's a good question. Maybe I can't get him out of my head, but no, it wouldn't be Schitt's Creek. It would have been, it's like it's Traveling with Levy or something. I don't even know. I'm not the primary one who watches this, but it exists.
I will say, like in the U.S., Levy is much more common. In Canada, Levy is much more common. I mean, the reality is it's the Levites, right? Like, so Levy sounds more correct than Levy.
But we got to get Levy because that's your actual name, right? And so I
That's
pride
what my
myself.
parents say.
Well, listen, if we're going to start, anyway. But Michael Levy, we'll continue to get this correct, or I will continue to get this better. But I thought that'd be funny. We'll do that, and we'll leave that there. But what we do want to move into is not just the history of Michael's last name, as much fun as that might be. We want to get into some of the stories we were not able to get to in the weekend show. And again, as a reminder for listeners, you've got me this week instead of Mike because of some pretty significant damage, weather brought to his home here recently. And so I am filling in for Mike, which, feels wrong. Maybe you don't know this. We'll do this right here. Michael, did you know that Mike was actually my professor?
And did you know that Mike and I have technically slept together in a grad student trip, Midwest Political Science Association grad students, where we had I think we had 5 to the room, and I think Mike was my bedmate back in grad school. So there's a Mike Baranowski ancestral tree that we were all falling from.
So you've either been taught by him, you've slept in the same bed with him. There's got to be some connection.
It was more of a Lincoln-esque sleeping. Let's just clarify that.
I like that you did it as Lincoln-esque. As a presidential scholar, I appreciate that. Well, the actual story that we were going to start out with, though, for the bonus show was the administration's campaign against, offshore wind. So what happened was it took a pretty big hit last Thursday. German energy giant RWE announced that it had reached a $1.22 billion settlement with the Department of the Interior to abandon 3 offshore wind energy projects off the coast of California, New York, and Louisiana. Now, under the terms of the deal, the RWE surrenders its federal offshore leases and agrees to redirect that money into natural gas development. Now, this marks the 5th major lease buyback by Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, bringing the total taxpayer tab to just a scooch over $3.9 billion paid to wind developers to simply stop building. That's right, to stop building. Now, the White House argues that offshore wind is costly, unreliable, and presents national security risks. However, congressional Democrats, including Raskin and Hoffman, have called it really a lawless taxpayer buyout, in their words. And they point out that after federal courts struck down the administration's construction bans, the White House started tapping Treasury Judgment Fund to pay off these directors directly, which is exactly what happened this past Thursday. So from an administrative law standpoint, this is kind of a wild case. I mean, look, it's wind. We were teasing about it before the show. This isn't bombing in Iran. Maybe it's not sexy in some kinds of ways, but it is still kind of a wild case. And so part of this question is the Interior Department executing a pragmatic pivot, or is it abusing judgment funds? Now, the other thing I thought we could talk a little bit about, Michael, is just Trump has long not liked wind energy. He sees it as being a bad thing. And so I did go down, I'll be honest with listeners, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole when it came to wind and the costs, and we can talk about that too. But I just want to start with that first question. I want to make it pretty straightforward. Do you think, whether we agree with it or not, is this an abuse of executive power? Why don't we start there, Michael?
So before I start there, I'm going to say, you went down the rabbit hole on wind. I went down the rabbit hole on our next story. And it's always interesting how different people are going to nerd out on different things and which rabbit holes we're going to go down. So
in this case, it makes it perfect. We both went down different. We can take listeners both holes that way, and that came out.
So I should just shut up and say, kind of like from My Cousin Vinny, when Joe Pesci says, "So what did you learn?" And just ask you to go and just wind you up a little bit. But I think certainly from my perspective, it's an abuse of power. And the first thing to say here for me is that Donald Trump's hostility to wind power is obviously not some newly discovered policy philosophy. He's hated wind turbines for years, and I think his understanding of electricity or sustainability is pretty light, as it is with many things. He thinks that solar, when the sun goes in, your TV is not going to work if it's plugged up to solar. Your electricity is not going to go on. He's not a rocket scientist when it or an electricity.
He's not even
scientist.
A battery technician, let's say.
No, but obviously a lot of his hostility just appears to be aesthetic. He's called them ugly monsters. He's said that they ruin the look of landscape. He spent years fighting turbines visible from his golf courses or his golf course in Scotland. And he even sued to try to block that project. And so I think that, with a lot of things with Trump, it's policy, it's dislike of something masquerading as a policy. And I think, certainly there's, I'll just shut up there and let's see, what kind of rabbit hole, interesting tidbits that there are.
Well, so I was curious. So the claim here. So I said, okay, let's set aside kind of, and you're not wrong, right? So I'm not disagreeing with you. President Trump.
I'm often wrong, by the way.
Well, in this one particular instance, anyway, I'll agree with you that Trump has this kind of innate hatred for wind and solar power, right? And it seems to be based on some unusual things. However, I generally want to start from the position to say, okay, if the White House or anybody is pushing something forward, what's the actual data going on here? What's the best argument that I can make for the person who's making it, even if it seems intuitively wrong for me? I want to start there. So I went down, the rabbit hole I specifically went down was to say, well, what does offshore wind power really look like as a policy, right? Is there a good reason to say, hey, we might want to rethink these? So what I learned, and I'll be honest, this was news to me. I didn't know all of this. Onshore wind is actually one of the lowest cost sources for new energy that exists. Onshore wind, when you're taking a look at megawatts per hour, is going to come in, again, it depends on some factors, between $37 megawatt per hour to $99 per megawatt hour, in that vicinity there. And so just on a purely kind of generation cost basis, including all the things you've got to do to make that wind capture go up, it is, and that's the unsubsidized cost I want to be added there, right? Because there's two different numbers you can look at. That's the unsubsidized cost. Offshore wind is, in fact, actually one of the most expensive, right? It does not have the same kinds of cost savings as onshore wind does. It is going to range somewhere from $105 to $167 a megawatt per hour. And the big reason for that is there is a ton of upfront costs to creating and maintaining offshore wind. And I didn't realize how much was actually going on there, right? So to get that, the materials there to build them is a major cost. As a matter of fact, one of the issues is you have to have these very compliant vessels get it out there. There's a whole subset of subsea high voltage cabling that requires, because it's salt water, it breaks these things down. And so you've got to have stuff that's not going to get broken down, which is more expensive than what you're going to do when you're doing onshore. And that doesn't, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. That is what makes these more expensive. So what I had to kind of come to a conclusion to say is offshore wind only becomes a competitive kind of wind with subsidization in a way where onshore wind, even without subsidization, can, and in some cases does, beat other things like natural gas. So I always like at least starting, and that was the hole that I started to go down, the rabbit hole I started to go down, Michael, because I want to give everybody their best case scenario. And so I'd have to say, okay, well, I learned a little something. There could be an answer to say this is expensive. Now, what this does not address, and I'm curious about your take on that, though, we're paying them out to not do it. Yeah. So does that actually make fiscal sense? Now it gets thrown up again. So there was the beginning of my rabbit hole for you.
Well, so I think I'll start two places. One is kind of like for Trump, I don't think he makes a distinction between offshore and onshore wind projects. Like I live in the Palm Springs area in California, and if you go, maybe it's about 2 or 3 miles from my house, there's huge turbine farm that runs for miles, and we get a significant percentage of our electricity from that. I'm sure that if he had a golf course that could see that, he would have a big problem with onshore wind as well. But I get your point, your broader point about offshore wind being much more expensive and looking with greater skepticism at projects if they don't meet certain criteria. A strong, consistent wind source, shallow water, close to major electricity demand, yada yada. And I know that when I've seen things in California, that some of the offshore floating wind, that they're probably not something that can become as sustainable as, say, in Denmark, where in the North Sea, where there's a significant amount of offshore wind. There's just the conditions seem right for making it much more sustainable. But then you have the question as you start to look with skepticism: is it all offshore wind, right? Like in making these deals to pay out just to stop any offshore wind, or are they using scientific rubrics and data to analyze which ones may not be sustainable over the long term and which ones may be?
And that still doesn't address, I think, the crux of the other problem, which is ought we to spend billions to once again interfere in market forces? And so if this is not going to be profitable, and if we want to be a little bit more on that free market side, right, the answer would seem to be to say, well, if this German company wants to come in and build something that's dumb, well, they're going to either figure that out or it's going to fail. Like, what is the advantage of spending judgment money? Like, so again, for a moment, I'm putting aside the legality of it and just saying, as a practical matter, do we really want to spend another $1 billion for this? That's where I start to have some questions and some problems here, is to say, okay, even if this is what we can see as being the difference, even if this is a higher cost, okay, I don't want to buy out factories that are going to be too expensive for producing drugs because they made a mistake. That's up to them. They've got to figure that. And or it could be that they've got it figured out in a way that I don't understand. That's what markets do. Like, I look at this data and say, I don't think you can do it. And maybe they've looked at it and gone, actually, we're experts in this and we can bring it in under or whatever, and they're going to make money. And in which case I should say, okay, good for you.
So from an economic perspective, I may be a liberal, progressive, whatever you want to call me, but I am still fairly free market oriented. And I don't
So you're not
necessarily.
kin yet then. You're not quite
No,
kin. Kin goes a little bit further.
yeah, I think where I come down, like whether it's this or other things, is how do we potentially look at the externalities of say wind or more sustainable forms of energy versus the drill baby drill crowd of 2008, and look at things that are sources of energy that are emitting massive amounts of pollutants into our air. And I think about like Make America Great Again sometimes in terms of this like longing for the old days. And those old days may be like, pre-civil rights era, they may be pre-gay rights era, they may all of those kinds of things. But when we had lots of coal jobs, when we had lots of steel jobs. And I just see that like reflexive action of Trump. Anything that is more modern or less 1950s and 1960s. There's a knee-jerk negativism to it, but I do just think about the fossil fuels and imposing the environmental and climate costs. Is like if you told me that, and I'm not saying it's true in this instance, if you told me like wind is slightly more expensive than coal or natural gas or whatever the case may be, but you then told me that it's cleaner, then I would be willing to subsidize it or subsidize consumers more than I would be to subsidize massively in perpetuity. And I think that's the key for offshore wind is, can you get to sustainability? Can you get to cost effectiveness? Can you get to competitiveness with other sources, non-sustainable sources of energy? But I don't know if you found that in the rabbit hole that you went down.
So when you look at the current rates, if because again, we're going down that a little bit, the subsidized rate for offshore wind right now is about $70 to $110, which means that it's going to be on the absolute top side of everything on the unsubsidized cost, and it's going to be way above everybody else on the subsidized cost, right? So even with its subsidizations, offshore wind does not appear to even come close. As a matter of fact, you would much be better off with solar panels, again, on average, than you would by doing the offshore wind. But you make an excellent point that sometimes gets, I think, obscured about this. And that is, on the one hand, we don't need, nor do we want as a population, I think, to go back to a period where we didn't have power, right? I like being air conditioned here in Oklahoma when it's 104 for 14 days in a row. And given climate change,
104. We have 120 out here sometimes. So I would love 104.
Listen, maybe we'll do it in person sometime, and we'll come on out. That's true, but however, I think the other bit here, and this is something that comes up sometimes. It doesn't always come up. I think that the balance of what we have considered when it comes to long-term sustainability has been pretty bad, right? When you move around the country, it doesn't take a lot of data to very quickly. You can almost intuitively see the data outcome, which is we have not built great kinds of communities because of the nature of having subsidized heavily gas and cars, right? And I think when we have these conversations, one of the problems, and this is difficult to put into the data, and I even did the data, highways, the way we have cars, they actually are in fact subsidized to huge amounts. And so when we look at the comparison, like you were saying, like if it was just a little bit higher, I think I'd take the little bit higher. And I would agree with you on that. But I don't think we're actually always honest about what a little bit higher is, because the baseline is always the pre-existing long-term subsidizations that we've had. It's not going to go, you're talking about making America great again. Well, the reason that we live in the kinds of places we do today is because of huge subsidizations for certain kinds of particular outcomes, and we're continuing to live with those outcomes. Now, I'm not saying that, oh my goodness, they all made a terrible choice. That was the choice that they had, and they've made it. But it was not a completely free market choice. And so as a result, we're still dealing with those downstream effects. So I would always like to add into this as a market guy to say, I am careful that our baseline is always something that was itself also subsidized.
Yeah,
And
I think a good example, sort of like take it to where I live with solar, because it's sunny most days here. A lot of folks have solar. When I just recently moved back to California, I bought a house that didn't have solar, and I immediately looked at, okay, I want to put solar panels on my roof. I actually decided not to, because the economics have changed since I last lived here. And I mean, there's two things. I mean, one is the one big beautiful bill, or whatever the heck it was called, took away the 30% tax credit for putting solar panels on your roof. So all of a sudden, A, it's going to cost me 30% more, but B, with California electricity, we have something called net energy metering, or whatever. I think that's what NEM stands for. And when I had originally bought solar panels a few years ago, I was selling excess power back to the grid at a really advantageous rate. Well, now under net NEM 3, which is what I'd have to sign up for, basically, anything that I send back to the grid, you're getting pennies or lower, sometimes zero. You're getting and selling back to the grid.
I didn't know about that.
And so
in other words, you're losing a bunch of money on that side as well.
Yeah,
I did not understand that.
Yeah, so the only way the economics make sense, at least where I am, is that then you're buying batteries so that you can the energy that you're generating, that you can store that for usage at night when you don't have the sun out.
But that's hugely expensive as well.
Yeah,
People don't realize lithium-ion batteries at that size and capacity are huge upfront costs that are degrading over time.
So to kind of compare it, on my house that I put it on before, which was now I'm getting into how big my place is. It was 1,900 square feet, and it cost me, after the tax subsidy, about $21,000 to put solar on. If I wanted to do that now, buying the battery, it's about $50,000 on a 1,400 square foot. So it's a smaller place, more expensive unit. And I think that's where government's making decisions on what it's going to subsidize and what it's not going to subsidize. And I do worry about, all the data centers that we're going to build and all of the need for excess energy and electricity output. And we're having incentives, we're disincentivizing the creation of new forms of energy, solar, particularly in California.
Yeah, it is. Solar doesn't get quite the same kinds of hits, but it still fascinates me that, well, I love to run, I love to bike, and it is weird to me the amount of space where we could put solar energy that we have not decided to do that as communities, that would also make more livable spaces. The extent to which we have not created livable spaces, to me, I think deserves some deep study. As a matter of fact, I just yesterday I biked 43 miles. I circumnavigated OKC, and we have some really beautiful spaces to do some of that. But it's weird where they are and where they're not, and how that all works out. There's a lot. If you want to know a lot about your city, get out, walk it, run it, and bike it. Story at a time, where we take a look at key moments in American politics and really dive into just that moment and why did it occur the way that it did, and what long-term effects it had on the country. I'm really excited about that. That'll be coming up shortly in September. So this and so much more is going to be available. So head down to the show notes, become a supporter of the Politics Guys today. If you like to do it the old school way, you can always direct your web browser to politicsguys.com/support. Again, that's politicsguys.com/support, or you can head to patreon.com/politicsguys. If you're not in a financial position to support the show right now, you can also just email us at mail@politicsguys.com so that we can make an arrangement. Or if you got any other question, you can reach out to us at mail@politicsguys.com. Now, for supporters, if you want to get a hold of us, don't forget, one of the benefits of being a supporter is you get access to Discord. And I know that Mike and I are probably on there an unhealthy amount of time. So if you'd like to reach out to us and you're a supporter, you can always head to Discord. Make sure you've joined in and join us. There's all different kinds of levels of support. So support support the show today and make the Politics Guys continue to be possible. No matter what you do on that front, though, I'd love for you to go ahead and hit that subscribe and rate button right now. That makes all the difference in the world. I close, as always, with a giant shout out to some people who make this show possible, and they are our executive producers. And they are Wilmer Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Brian Matza, Jody Marie Miller, and Sean Fugit. We'll be back with our full episode this weekend. I hope you'll join us then.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,